Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Destroy All Humans of Extreme Metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka Blake Judd Kickstarter stretch goal, actually receive the product.
And I am the black metal guy, aka 1 hour of penis slapping, please.
Where do you order that? Yeah, I mean, you're phrasing it like you're at a front counter, like requesting the service.
Yeah, maybe in the Netherlands.
It's that I can imagine that. You know, it's one of the Western European states I haven't been to, and at this point, I think that my idea of it in my head is probably more fun than reality.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's Netherlands. What is it? Amsterdam. What is it? Amsterdam being to sex what Austin is to indie rock.
Very nice. Well, and also it's like,
I don't know. I've barely ever been to. I've maybe been to the airport. I know fucking nothing about Amsterdam. I feel like somehow that was a joke. I feel like somehow there was a Netherlands joke last week too. I don't know why. I fucking love Dutch black metal, but hey.
we resent the Dutch as people. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the allure of the Amsterdam trip has basically disappeared now that weed is de facto legalized in the U.S.
Yeah, I think it was more of a thing of '90s culture. Yeah, when we say it's like really, yeah, it's just jokes about like, oh, where are hookers legal? Amsterdam, haha. Of course, now they're legal like all over, but same with weed, right? It's
yeah, but why would I want to get a hooker when I have OnlyFans available? A hooker requires leaving the house. I'm not doing that shit.
You request the hour of penis slapping and then perform it yourself.
You
just need her to witness it.
Yeah. I mean, it's findom. I think that in excuse me. I think that with the current trajectory of Western sexuality, the ultimate sexual experience will be this almost Zizekian, I pay a woman on webcam to imagine sex with me without ever touching herself or getting naked, and then I give her $200.
That does seem to be where it's going. Although, honestly, even asking her to imagine sex with you seems a little ambitious. Wait. I paid a woman online to imagine me having sex.
Yeah, not even necessarily with her. It's become so difficult for me to imagine for myself, I have to outsource that to an app. All right. So, we got a show today. Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast, and we're going to do our spin-off podcast about modern sexuality, and there's nothing better than two men obsessed with black metal with autism to talk about that.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, we'll just talk about Lucifer every episode, but we do that on this show too. So, the usual housekeeping, follow me, the death metal guy, on Facebook at Terminus me, the death metal guy, on Facebook at Terminus Podcast, and the black metal guy on Instagram at Terminus Extreme Metal. And then if you're particularly dedicated to the dark arts, feel free to donate $5 and up to the Terminus Patreon, which gives you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes, as well as the Terminus Black Circle, our private Discord server where there's been a lot of conversation about Finnish death metal as of today.
And as always, remember that liking the YouTube videos and even subscribing to the channel really helps. And if you have if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can actually, if you so desire, write us a review, which we would appreciate.
Those are all good bets. The algorithm doesn't want you to know about Terminus. The globalist agenda is preventing you from hearing about torso fuck.
I think it doesn't like the swears.
Probably not. The swears are probably ruining things, but we refuse to compromise our art. So we've got a pretty cool thematic show after the intro section, which is something completely unrelated, but something I've been looking forward to for a while. This is the debut full-length by the long-standing project Smallpox Aroma from Thailand. The record is called Festering, Embryos of Logical Corruption, and it is out now on Inhuman Assault Productions on CD and digital on Bandcamp. So Smallpox Aroma has been around for a pretty long time. They've been around since 2006. They started as more of a gore grind leaning band, but their newest material over the past several years has been focused on very pure grindcore. So I was really excited to see these guys doing a full length. Now, granted, this is like a pure traditional grindcore release, so a full length is, about 18 minutes long, but I think it's actually kind of perfect for the content within. For those not familiar, Smallpox Aroma features Palwak, possibly one of the best drummers in the world now, and almost without dispute the best in the Thai scene, and probably like top 10 in the metal scene overall. So what can you expect? Well, traditional grindcore, a little bit of death metal inflection, really impressive drumming and vocals, and just a remarkable clarity of form. Smallpox Aroma is like almost technical grindcore in a way. There's not a lot of super flashy stuff, but everything is delivered with such ferocity and simultaneous clarity that I think this pairs really well with the Noisy Neighbors record that we covered at the beginning of this year. Both are lightly death metal inflected grindcore records with a lot of subtle technicality and really distinct sort of catchy hooks in a lot of these songs. This is a 13-track album. The longest track is 2.5 minutes, and it's the only one that crossed the 2-minute threshold. So these are almost micro songs for the most part. But as is usual with good grindcore, these guys have an incredible instinct for how to develop and execute complete ideas within really small time frames. So there's not really a ton more to say without just letting you guys hear it. So let's go to the second track on the album, which is titled Into the Realm of Nothingness. And of course, we're just going to listen to whole songs here. So this is a good example of what the whole album sounds like. You've got these remarkably tense yet frothing, diving up and down the fretboard grind riffs with this sort of tech death precision, as well as just some really awesome mosh parts. The first time I listened to this record, I swear I almost punched all of my cats. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a grindcore album, and it is fucking awesome.
I love that nonsense riff. The just boo boo riff.
Yeah. That's like a classic grindcore riff. That probably originates in Napalm Death or something.
Yeah, we talked about that. If there's like anything that is distinctive, any kind of riffing that is distinctly grindcore, it's like short functional riffing that from the standpoint of other genres is nonsense.
Yeah, just these sort of like slashing dissonant angles. You know, they're not even like complete riffs. They're just these fragmented ideas that are played really fast. You know, just as like a textural thing to get you to the next full idea.
Yeah, we talked about that with Internal Rot, I think. But this is a different kind of grindcore that just is grindcore. There's a little bit of the... That sounds like Brutal Death.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, Paul Walk has a big history playing in brutal death bands. You know, he's in like Ecchymosis and Biomorphic Engulfment and a bunch of other just like really high speed tech stuff. I mean, you can hear his drumming is fucking phenomenal. But I really like the way these guys juxtaposed sort of the nonsense grindcore riffs with these more defined riffing ideas. Like that sequence with the mosh break into that sort of stop-start cryptopsy riff over the blast beat is just awesome. And it's really cool that they managed to make things so distinctive in, you know, a 1.5-minute package.
Oh.
So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like I said, guys, the mini slot for me now is just like, this is an awesome album. Not a ton to say about it, but it's just really cool. So we'll go to the other one. We're going to go to a really long, ambitious one. This one's about 2 minutes. This is called Metamorphic Passage of Time. So this one starts with a really cool sort of modern Napalm Death intro section. They allow themselves like 30 seconds to just play around before they get into the meat of the song. This one has a little bit more crust flair, and I also really want to point out just how vicious and unhinged the vocal performance is on this album. It's fucking awesome, and on this one we get a little a cappella break where it really gets to show itself off. So yeah, I think the real unifying feature of all the grindcore bands that we bring onto the show is that ability to make really distinct musical ideas out of these very minimal sort of elements. It's hard to do. You know, a minute or two is just not a lot of space to play with. And there was a period during like the 2000s into the early 2010s where there were a lot of these kind of noisy grindcore bands that were texturally kind of fun and interesting, but none of the music really stuck with you in a meaningful way. And in a sense, it almost became like its own weird sort of fashion music. It's just like, this is very loud and fast, but it doesn't impart any meaning that sticks with you.
Are you still complaining about insect warfare?
Yeah, I'm still complaining about insect warfare.
This is Josh from Defeated Sanity, and you're listening to Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast.
And we're back from debating what's really going on in Antarctica to review Yoga by Nécropole, out now on Northern Heritage. So, this is one of the projects of the Frenchman Amertume, who has, despite the dividing his efforts between several projects and having relatively few full lengths has had a huge influence on the modern scene. And was playing what could be considered the nowadays style of, mostly consonant, heroic sounding. People call it melodic black metal, right, in the French style, or or something like the chivalric style of black metal that we talk about on the show. And I think it's one of those bands that I think is more influential on other influential musicians. That's something we talked about in the last one, right? Mm-hmm. So, so this is only the second full length from Nécropole, in part because I think for a long time, Amertum was dividing his efforts with his other project, Cavern. Cavern was the sort of hermetic solo project. Nécropole was the ripping live band, which he did with other guys. But at this point, Nécropole has shed its other members, and at the same time, he has dissolved Cavern. So it seems like basically he realized, wow, well, with those other guys out of the band, Nécropole is Cavern, so why am I not treating these projects as the same thing, right? And we always talk on the show about the importance of concentrating your efforts and things, so that is cool and interesting. He's staking everything on this now. And I remember that the last record from Cavern we reviewed 2 years ago, La Fin de tous les chants, the end of all the songs, it felt like the end of the project. To me, it felt like a little bit depleted relative to some of his earlier stuff. Mm-hmm. We should also talk about where Nécropole is coming from. I suppose the biggest record from this constellation of bands was Solarité in 2018. And that is the debut of Nécropole. Although the demos and EPs were also really influential. I think those were the ones that were really... You know what really happened? It's like the demos and EPs of his bands were so influential that by the time Solarité came out, it didn't seem as distinctive and original as it actually was. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, by the time the full lengths came out, his influence, like his unique contributions to riffing and structuring, had already been sent out through the scene. So he sort of ends up becoming a contemporary of the very people he influenced.
Yes, yeah, and I think also to some degree, there are other people drawing from a similar well whose projects only really coalesced around that time too, right? So in part, he's moving in parallel with people, but he had a lot of influence on other musicians, so you could say like one parallel we could address and would be a way of framing this review is a sort of, and really the whole rest of this episode is a comparison to Vehemence. So the bands are kind of synced with one another in an interesting way, but offset by a year. So Solarité came out in 2018. And it was really it wasn't like, Solarité, I was tangenting. Solarité came out in 2018, and the Vehemence record that really broke them big, so their second record, Orthodox, came out in 2019. And now we had a Vehemence record last year, and now we have a Nécropole record. And something I'll draw on throughout this episode is the notion that, right, black metal or whatever this is, solar metal, is warrior music, right? And that paradigm, that character of the warrior works on a spectrum between the outlaw and the king. And the secret is that these are the same thing. Each contains the other, and they exist in their natural conflict is productive. And, the classic example of the conjunction of this would be the Robin Hood story, right? Robin Hood, displaced lord in the forest, defends England for the return of the rightful king, or Conan, Right. Conan the Thief, Conan the Pirate, Conan the King, Conan the Conqueror, Conan the King, right? And last year we talked about last year when we reviewed the Vehemence, right? It was a very mature record, and I described it as kingly, right? There was something. There was no attempt really to conquer new musical territory per se. It was just a really assured exercise in what he had already built, and an enlargement and adding a more grandeur to it. And it was, the king ruling over an established domain. And you could contrast that with the previous record, Ordalis, which was the sort of, it was furious. It was, had just these crazy riffs flying all over the place, right? Extreme fast, very impressive, right? And that's the mood of the kind of questing, battling knight, trying to sort of carve out his own realm and his own place in the world. And that's kind of the same deal here. Solarite was, you can see it on the cover, right? It's just, a classical hero smiting a bestial centaur, right? Warrior hero carves out his realm. And, it toned down, it's a lot more refined and ornate than the earlier Necropole stuff, but it still has that grinding, unhinged energy, and there's a fire to it, a solar flame to it, and a stomp, and it's all sort of dazzling. It's meant to overawe the listener. And Yoga, on the other hand, is this calm and assured power of someone who is centered in the kingdom and stabilizing the kingdom. But here the parallel ends, because where Vehemence, from that kind of assurance, sort of felt like making an honest turn towards heavy metal, right, and accessibility. You emphasize that record's power metal aspect, yeah. The has never sounded less interested in pleasing people, which is weird because people love this record, but perhaps for the wrong reasons, or not all the reasons. And we can get into that in a bit. What did you make of it?
So I think this is just objectively extremely good. It's just a brilliant execution of French black metal in a few different ways. So Solarite, the first full length, is a record that I really liked. But I guess it wasn't really distinctive enough from other French black metal that I really liked to put it into regular rotation. I probably just need to go back and revisit it. I probably have more time for it now that the fine-grained distinctions make themselves more apparent, especially after doing the show and covering so much French black metal. Yoga, though, is just kind of brilliant. The standard French black metal reference points are all in play, but what this actually reminds me of more than anything is later Lutomysl, which is I've been getting back into in a really big way over the past few months, listening to some of the newer records that I had just kind of skipped over before, just because Lutomysl releases records and you don't fucking hear about it until 2 years later. There's just no effort made to promote it. So there's something about the way Lutomysl constructs music that is very similar to the way Amertum constructs music on this record, where it's very lead guitar focused, with strangely gauzy yet very invigorated chord backing. It's almost like structurally more like Ukrainian black metal than it is French black metal, despite the fact that all the melodic content is distinctly French. This is really good to pair with the Karn record that we covered, a week or two ago.
Like a week, a weekish.
Yeah, that was also really focused on lead guitar, but this is distinctly and unapologetically like a one-man project in a really good way. In the sense that this is clearly like an auteur's take on this kind of black metal record. And and the sort of fundamental minimalism that results from being a one-man black metal project is used as a strength and not a detriment here. So I guess my take on this is that this is sort of like as sophisticated as you get within that sort of burly, sort of, in a sense, almost bulldozering one-man black metal project format. It's minimal and ferocious, but like oddly tasteful at the same time. And it's also, what I really like about it is, despite how sort of wild and weird this band can be, it has no sense of, how do I phrase this? So, for instance, there's a lot of Magla-isms that are dotted around this record. And I can imagine another similar guy, like, refusing to incorporate those ideas because it's Magla. Amertum doesn't give a fuck how you feel about Magla, or, like, whether that's, like, a corny thing to put in because it's too big. He takes the technology, he executes it extremely well, and he puts his own spin on it, and it doesn't matter whether any of this shit reminds you of Magla, or Emperor, or Lutomysl, or anything.
Yes.
It's just a completely natural outgrowth.
Yeah.
And he has no interest in any sort of debate of, like, oh, is an influence too mainstream or too underground or anything. Yeah.
Yes, he's not going to put anything off the table a priori, right? It's all going to be things he likes, and there's going to be no, like, oh, this riff is, like, too long, or, oh, this riff is too short, or, this riff's too simple, right? There are plenty of really simple riffs. There are plenty of really fancy riffs. There's no sense, like, X riff is the wrong genre, or anything like that. And yeah, not insecure about being influenced by some of the biggest names in black metal. And that is a huge distinction that sets this guy's work above the work it has influenced. Because the early raw demos by both of his bands and EPs were sort of fundamental for the nowadays sort of raw tape black underground, which is, pop music with bad production. And and the effort is to avoid anything that, like, sounds good or powerful. And this guy has always been very focused on just making a really good black metal with every resource at his disposal at the time.
Yeah, this is guided by a very complete internal logic, which all the best black metal is. And it's like, it's not really a... The thing is, this is an eminently listenable record, and and in a sense, it's very accessible. But we can kind of, because I know you have notes on that aspect of the record. I guess sort of like, not to undercut you, but just the idea is like, it sort of like doesn't matter whether it's accessible or not. Like that's not even a question in Amertum's mind. I do not believe that he made this with any consideration of what anyone would think about it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
It just is what it is. I would say basically this record is working on multiple levels. I don't know, I'm not fully committed to this take. I think after listening to it again today, I might nuance it somewhat. But I think, yeah, it is, in some sense, it's accessible. Or, no, I guess it just really is, right? It really is accessible. If you like how these, in some ways, it's an easy-to-love record. 85 to 90% of this, if not more, well, no, 85 to 90, is this kind of smoothly flowing, consonant melody that everyone loves these days. And often at its most ornate and flowery. They're the sort of big riffs of French melodic black metal. That all black metal is melodic. I shouldn't even use that fucking term. But
we all know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. The big riffs that are associated with French black metal. And people online will talk about the riffs, man. But I don't think it's really about that. I think that many of the most many of the riffs that sound most like early Hour Lock, or that sound most like the most epic Peste Noire, or Vehemence, or whatever, those riffs are not really the focal point. And if you isolate them, they tend to blur together. And I don't think pound for pound they're even like as good or as distinctive as the riffs that he wrote to invent this style. I don't think that's really the point. When we reviewed the Karn record, right, the other week, we were talking about what makes a powerful riff is, in part, having these sort of decisive inflection points where it does something or changes, right? That being a method that we associated with, like, Spite Extremewing, for instance, where, like, in the middle of a riff, it will, like, dive or redirect or soar or something. And this is a guy who clearly was, unlike almost everyone else, was directly influenced by Spite Extremewing. I think Solarite has that all over it, and it really is the first self-conscious... It's the first thing that just basically calls itself solar black metal, which is making good on their, making good on what they were innovating. And so Amartum is familiar with that strategy, but he's using it more at the level of the whole song, or at the level of the album. So it seems like the riffs that are carrying the weight are often the strangest and the most, or they're often, they're the rougher, darker riffs, basically. They're often simpler than the things around them, but they often have really dense, complex, high-tension harmonies. And they have strange, jagged shapes. That lightning bolt shape we were talking about with Spite Extremewing. And in these moments, this riff intervenes, and it punctuates, energizes, and redirects all of the flowery riffing that is the main sort of homogeneous material of the record. Does that make sense?
I get what you're saying. You're sort of implying that there's a metastructural conceit where the most melodic, sort of traditional, like, flowery French black metal riffing is a sort of, like, foundation for the album, but it's simultaneously, like, an ethereal thing. It is sort of a mass that the distinct ideas swim through.
Yeah, it is the matter of the record and other riffs. It's at certain riffs that are giving it form.
I can kind of see that. I would argue that I guess the only point that I would argue is that I think that we can't discount the fact I would argue that the basic level of riffing on this in terms of French black metal riffing is substantially better than almost anyone out there. I think that, a lot of this is built out of homogeneous material, but if you isolate certain sections and really pay attention to them, there's this, like, masterful subtlety to the way that a lot of this stuff is arranged that, I guess it's not particularly distinct stylistically, but qualitatively, it's just, like, way the fuck in front of almost everyone.
I agree he's on the top of this game. Right. I mean, I think that's fair to say. There is a very high baseline level of composition here. And maybe I'm taking that for granted in the same way that, say, I took it a little for granted with Cromlech, right? There's a very high baseline. And I think also other things could be said. So on repeat listens, yes, I think there really are just some stonkers, some really good, chivalric French black metal riffs here, right? That is true. And they do carry, some of them are given weight. And also, the closer you look at certain songs, the more, at least depending on the song, the more it seems like the whole song is made of these sort of inflection points.
Yeah, I think there's
which just means it's a really good song.
Yeah, I think that even the most sort of, like, typical melodic ideas at work here are, one, just extremely good within the confines of the style, and two, I think the whole vibe of the record, this sort of like ethereal, mystical quality recontextualizes those sort of standard melodies in a way that gives them new life.
Okay. Here's the last thing I'd say in defense of that, Eddie. I think there's like part of the assurance of this record and its sort of removal from part of the assurance of this record is like using this stuff that is incredibly high detail as stock riffage.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's like the sort of horror vacui method. The Solaritary was very dense most of the way through, but there actually was space in it. There was like zero space in this record.
Yeah, this is very dense.
All right, so I think whatever else progress I'm going to make in my understanding of this will have to come from listening to it and talking about it with you. So let's go to, I don't know, the first track that really blew me away, Withershins, the second one, and start it right at the beginning. Okay. I think I actually do somewhat stand by the point I was putting forward at the beginning. So here you get like a really good, really well written sort of ornate chivalric riff. Da 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 da. Right? It turns around in this very neat resolution. Each of the scale runs is really stock for this style. The thing that gives it its distinctness is really that there's a very fully worked out chord progression under it. However, to me that still sounds like, okay, really good execution in an established style. Second riff is a kind of more mid-tempo part that almost just immediately gives the kind of orgasmic release that I think a lot of people want from this stuff. But I can't remember it. And it's like strictly functional in the song. It happens and then just is immediately cut through by this sort of sawing, downstroking, da 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 da, this very high tension riff, that then launches into a second high tension riff, that the da 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 da, kind of a raga riff. Mm-hmm. It's the only place on the record where you actually, or one of the only, where you really hear the connection in an overt way to the sort of the esoteric Hindu subject matter, right? Right. It's like there's a kind of raga drone thing going on. He always avoids sort of hokey Orientalism, though. Yeah. So that's one of the only spots you get it. But and then it's a weird thing happens where he hits that inflection point in the third riff. Then in that fourth riff, as it starts to get this more raga drone feel, the last turnaround of it, he resolves it like the initial chivalric riff. He gives it a flowery, harmonious resolution. And then there's like one more interstitial riff, and then he just relaunches that first big heroic riff. And when it comes in again, I feel like it comes in with so much more force.
Yeah. I think that, well, one, I'll actually say this, listening to this again, makes me think even more distinctly that maybe one of the things that sets this apart from a lot of French black metal is this very considered, like, deep appreciation of, like, Ukrainian Russian black metal. There's something about the way Amertum links riffs that really reminds me of some of the more aggressive stuff that came out of Ukraine, especially, like, 2000s into early 2010s type shit. And I really like that. I think that we're both kind of like saying the same thing, but approaching it from different angles, where, yeah, a lot of the melodic phrases you'll find on this record are pretty familiar to us as, like, devotees of the style. But we got to keep in mind, one, Amertum like had a hand in inventing a bunch of them, so he gets permanent access to them, and
sure.
and two, there's a real agglutinative quality to a lot of these songs that race through riffs. I mean, that sample was 5 or 6 riffs there, yes. And something emerges from the interrelation of those things. It's almost like the touchstone that I always use for French black metal, like Take. Where Take will do similar stuff, where over the course of a couple minutes they'll rush through like 6 riffs, none of which are that significant on their own, but the sort of breathless energy that it gives to the music is its own purpose there.
Okay, I think that's a very good point, and that's what I was trying to that sort of helps bring out what I was trying to get at. Lest there be a mistake, I am not criticizing this record. I think it's fun. I think it's brilliant. I really like this record. And I think it's and I think that the weight is less on certain individual big riffs than on structure. In the biggest sense, that's what I meant by like these inflection points in the song.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
It's about structure and more than the sum of its parts. So with Solarite, right, the music moves like, it works like conventional black metal. Or like the Spite Extreme records, at least the early ones. It's about transfer of force, right? Smite, steamroll, overpower, right? Yoga is about like a force that resides in solidity and integrity of structure, but the structure is beauty, right? It's harmonious and ethereal. That gives it this feeling of sort of an invincible fortress beyond time because of its relative delicacy and stability. It's sort of, and I feel like that's kind of the yoga idea, right? You see this sort of self-contained lotus pose.
Yeah, and it's sort of, it's sort of this like, coolly arrogant record.
Yes,
I really like that. It's like it doesn't convey the sort of moment to moment combativeness of regular black metal because it doesn't need to. It's so assured of its own position above everything else, you know? It fucking rules.
Exactly. And so I think it's more and yet I think you're right to point out that despite that, the songs really do move, right?
Yeah.
It's not just about like, a good example of structure music or whatever is like Ruins of Beverast, right? This isn't really like architecture in any apparent way. That's why it's this sort of ethereal architecture. And the songs really move. Like that sample just zips along, and each riff just hurtles into the next.
Yeah. It's very... even if no individual riff is designed to be a standout, it's nevertheless extremely exciting music.
If you compare it to Solarite, you'll hear, like, Solarite is ripping. This record is not conventionally ripping.
Yeah.
And the rippingness has to do, say, with the propulsion and the sickness of the individual riffs. Right?
Yeah.
Like Rain in Blood is ripping. Every riff is sick, every riff drives it forward, and is relentlessly fast. This record is like, it has a different kind of speed.
Yeah. It's tempered by its own confidence, but not in a bad way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
So, we just talked about how the individual riffs aren't that crucial to this record, so let me play a sample where I talk about individual riffs a lot. I'm going to go to the track Sound is the Source. This one just blows me the fuck away every time I hear it. I'm going to start right at the beginning, and I'll give kind of the breakdown of the structure of the riffs after it plays, but I'll say my ears... I raised an eyebrow quizzically at the intro to this song, which has one of the most direct sort of Mgla-isms. But I'm gonna talk about how he uses Mgla and how he uses other bands and other ideas in a way that still feels very personalized to this one. So that song opens with a very direct Mgla-ism. That those sort of glassy arpeggios over the rock and roll beat on the drums. That's going to be a very exercises in futility kind of technique, or even age of excuse.
Grossa.
Well, Grotto, well, I mean, McGlaw's like always done it. I guess I'm just associating it with kind of them popping off like over riffs like that. So
I just keep going. That's pedantic of me. Keep going.
Okay. And then we start sequencing very rapidly through these riffs. We get this really strong kind of dark inflection point trem riff that sort of opens things up. Then we go into a variation on the intro riff when the vocals kick in. Then break into a single string lead like Karn, but just like not quite as like explosively weird as they are, but still very much in that vein. And then just a brilliant total Franco finish riff. It's just absolutely like it's the best riff on Let the Devil In that wasn't actually on the album. And then into a variation on that with recontextualized drumming that turns it into this sort of like black metal RAC inflected with emo stomp riff.
Back to the Migla thing a bit.
Yeah, back to the Migla thing a little bit. And what I think is interesting is like the way that Amertum uses these sort of like big obvious influences like Migla or Sargeist, it almost makes you like rediscover what was so good about those things to begin with. Now, you know, the black metal scene is completely littered with people imitating Migla and imitating Sargeist. It can be easy to forget what those tools can accomplish when in the hands of someone who's just really fucking good at using them. And this is a case where he's taking these big, obvious ideas that we've heard in many other places and just executing them at a level that's just beyond what most people would consider possible. Like, I haven't heard a Sargeist knockoff riff that good outside of Sargeist. It's great.
That riff is really good, and it shows the ability to snap in a second from one level of resolution to another. Right, you know, that song has a lot of sort of spiraling intricacy, right? And it has these, you know, flyaway leads and things, and then, I actually just hummed the riff, but I sped it up. Sorry, I'm not remembering whichever was the fancier riffs, but it just suddenly we're at a big minimalist riff. Right, like just long, drawn-out chords. It's funny you call it a like. Ordinarily, I would argue with you about it being a Sargeist riff and say that's a Seigneur Voland riff. But as we've learned, Seigneur Voland was way more influential on the Finns than it was on the French themselves.
Yeah, it's very interesting how that's worked.
Yeah, and then that the French seem to have been getting it more from the same sources, like Gorgoroth. And also maybe from an even earlier inventor of that style, like Osculum Infame. And so this really does sound kind of like Sargeist. And in one of the songs, in the Manifold Realm, which I sample later, there's just really a Let the Devil In riff. And so I think I'm with you there. There really is just like, Sargeist or something. And there is just no sense that, like, a riff that simple or a riff that catchy or epic is beneath him. And what he gives it is all the, instead of sounding sugary or overdone, it just sounds, sort of lofty and resolute.
Yeah, it's not just sort of trudging in the same, like, stoked about Satan but kinda sad territory that a lot of bands are. Like, it has a distinct purpose and vision to it. Yes.
The riffs on Sargeist here capture the thing that is most serious about that band, which is this sort of, the sense that being a Satanist is hard work. And is demanding, right? There's a sense of like burning spiritual devotion in some of the best Sargeist songs. And although, you know, the thematics are a little different here, he hears that in those riffs and captures it.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. You gotta do a lot of sacrifices before you get the evil orgy. All right, you don't just putter your way into the temple, declare your life to Satan, and then you're just like fucking nuns left and right. No, this is a goddamn blue collar household here.
But. And, the other thing that riff does is it harkens back to his earliest stuff. That could have been off the Cavern demo.
Yeah.
Like, you just like a lot more sort of like rickety and raw and necrotic. But, just more of those like sort of bold 2 or 3 string chorded riffs. And yeah, the Miglasm is awesome. I mean, this is a guy who would have been listening to them from Grotza. Mm-hmm. And Grotza is like the most stomping and arpeggiated of all of them. It really focuses on that, and there are a few moments on this record that are like quotes from that. But you're right that stuff becomes really prominent again on Exercises, and I'm sure he likes Exercises.
Yeah, it's just a really good album. It's an album that's easy to decry because of its outsized influence, but it's just really excellent. So let me go to...
He's not afraid of good bands.
Yes, thank you. That's a philosophy we try to maintain on the show, which is good bands are good, regardless of how big they are.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go to another one. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Civias?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if there was some weird French inflection there.
Sounds right to me. I don't know.
So, for this one, I'll talk about it a little bit, but it really speaks for itself. I think that this may be the first non-North American fully fledged outlaw rock song. And it's kind of unique on this album. There's not really another track on this record that sounds exactly like this. It's really sprightly and melodic. It's got like major key inflections. It's got these stompy, hardcore inspired rhythmic switches. This sort of subtle emo chording going on underneath a lot of it. And of course the Franco-Finnish foundation. It's all there, and if this came out of like an American band, it would not shock me at all. You started spazzing out at the end there. That part, that, but you never finished your sentence.
Oh, that last riff.
So, like, the kind of perky, major key melodies, I like okay here. They're not... I like them. It sounds a lot like, first of all, you're totally right about sounding American. That sort of major key folk melody sounds a hell of a lot like the kind of Appalachian Spring type riff that you hear in the Ink and Fire record.
Yeah,
right?
You were totally right. You wrote that in the notes, and that was something I was thinking when I heard the song. I was like, this is very Ink and Fire.
Yeah. It's like Ink and Fire with a very different musician's inflections. I mean, Ink and Fire, MK from Finn was also very influential at the root of this style. And it's like hearing their two different iterations on, this more sort of direct, rockish, kind of folky thing. I think I prefer the version that sounds like it's recorded in a wind tunnel. However, I think kind of the things that happen at the end of the song really bring it all together for me and make it completely worth it. At the end, he's been developed this kind of this kind of dancing around the maypole melody, and then at the very end, it remains equally bright, but just the intervals shift, and it just becomes just this soaring mountainous trem riff.
Yeah, it's
like an ode to joy riff.
Yeah, it really is. I was thinking that like parts of that melody sounded like they were quoted from some sort of classical piece, like maybe something off like Vivaldi's Four Seasons or something. But I can't tell exactly what it is. A few other things that I want to point out. Another direct point of comparison here is going to be Makwahiedl. In the way he does those super high needling, like single string flowing trem arrangements. Two, the drumming across this record is fucking sick. Like, we don't talk about drumming when we do black metal reviews very often, unless it really surprises us. And for me, it's actually one of the highlights of this record. It's super musical. It's clearly in part patterned off of, Dark Side from Magla in a lot of the arrangements of cymbal runs. There's also this unusual sort of jazzy inflection he likes to put on things. And he's just constantly switching various subtleties about the way these rhythms are played. Like if a riff loops 4 times, you're never going to hear the beat under it played exactly the same way. It can be little accents, little minor rhythmic variations, but there's just a ton going on. And
the blasts are super. There's expansion and contraction of the timing within the blast beats.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's like the there is, and they also, at times sound like at times they sound as fast and as brutal as like Morbid Angel or War Metal blasting or like gravity blasts.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? At times I'm like, damn, that's fast.
Yeah, they're just kind of blurring.
And this is important because as far as maybe there's a session drummer, but I'm pretty sure he's doing the drumming himself.
Yeah.
And, he's credited with drums. So these are live drums that he's doing himself. And although, it becomes complicated because, there are live musicians, but they're not recording with him. Yeah, he's playing the drums.
Yeah, he's become an extremely good drummer.
Yeah, and that is really part of the challenge. I think we've talked about this before, but one reason the one-man band format usually sucks is that it's not a serious effort to make a band. Mm-hmm. Like Varg really played all the instruments, and he had to work within his own limitations as a drummer. And, he also had to get himself to play blast beats up to acceptable Norwegian speed.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas, this is and, there's maybe a lot rougher drumming on the early, Cavern stuff or whatever, right? But, this is somebody who took that project really seriously and is not relying on programmed drums and is not, has also not remained static with, really minimal drumming.
Yeah, agreed. It's a very important voice to this music, and it almost reminds me a little bit of how drumming is used in like Imha Tarakat. Imha Tarakat is actually kind of a reference point for me on this, especially in its like this album's weirdest, most major key moments. And then the last thing that I want to add, which is really something that you've brought to attention more than me, which is kind of funny given what it is, which is a lot of this is like kind of DSBM in a way, like fast DSBM chord structures. And I think that that's just because DSBM is the sort of like understated source material of a ton of shit that's just taken for granted in black metal right now. But I assume from Amertum it's probably coming like more directly because he's expressed interest in that style in and of itself in other projects.
Spite, for instance, which is sort of like gothy, stompy, punkish DSBM. I think that's right. I mean, it's not a secret anymore because we say it on the show, but like, this guy is in on the secret that Migla is in part a DSBM band. So I can hear that. That makes sense. I could also hear like a Nictalgia thing or whatever. Let's go to the next one. So, this record is difficult to sample, not because there's just like a homogeneous continuity to it, right? Which there really isn't. The point is that there are parts that are very smoothly flowing that are then sharply demarcated and move into a new one. But more because, like, once the songs start, they just don't stop. Right? And so here's a song that maybe disproves what I was saying about, de-emphasized bass line riffing given structure by inflection point riffing, because, like, this song is just all inflection point riffing, which means it's just a very traditional, extremely good black metal song.
Yeah, so how about the literal Sargeist riff?
Yeah, it's so good, man. It's so good.
Is that like Discovering the Enshrouded Eye or something?
I thought it was the second riff off Burning Voice of Adoration. But with like a different turnaround at the end. I think the chords are the same, though. I'll have to re-listen to it and double check.
Yeah. But that is a very obvious case of a Sargeist riff, and later in the song, he half-times it and lets it sprawl out a bit, and it's just even more grand, and the connection is more obvious. But, you know, in a way, there's a sort of grand tour of everything this guy likes thing going on, as in a really authentic attempt to make the most complete work possible, right? If you ever wanted to hear a Migla riff that you can just go like, this is War 2, right? That is the end, that is the last riff on this. It's like one of the Migla arpeggiated riffs, but played like speed metal. And I feel like I've heard that riff before somewhere else, like very close. Something, but I can't place it. More than that, though, it's just the way that structure keeps moving. It is so propulsive. Maybe I'm changing my mind. Maybe this is not deliberately sort of restrained and detached music, or maybe not so architectural and ethereal, because I mean this is, I think, the most aggressive track, so it's sort of an exception, but it's also one of the longer ones, and it's at a focal point in the record structure. This is also a place where we can talk about the Nécropole following on Spite Extremewing and the solar metal lineage, because some of the best riffs are or that riff that was just like a Nandu Corduca riff that was almost a death metal riff. You heard that one, right?
Yeah. I mean, we've been wrong about the Spite Extremewing thing 8 dozen times before, but my hand to God, we're right this time. All right, we are back with our final record for tonight, and this record is an inclusion that feels very like 2020 or 2021 Terminus, when we weren't like tracking as many labels, so a lot of shit that wound up on the show was just bizarre stuff that we found in the wild. This is exactly the case for this record. This is the self-titled full length by Heresie. Released on France Black Death Grind, which seems like just a small, just general purpose local extreme metal label out in France. Heresie are not a band that I had any familiarity with before this. It is a sort of a French ruralist black metal duo, although there's only 2 people on this record, but there's 4 people listed on Metal Archives. I'm not sure if they're live musicians or how the lineup shakes out, but the material on this record was composed by the core duo. So this isn't something I usually talk about much on the show, but I think it bears mention here, and there's things to talk about within this topic, which is these guys are really young. The core 2 members of this, I know one of them is 20, and then the other guy, I'm guessing he's going to be around the same age, maybe a little bit younger. So this project started just a couple years back when these guys were in their late teens. And it sounds like it in a good way. A lot of the most pivotal extreme metal records were made by guys in their late teens and early 20s. And I would say that there is a certain kind of record that can only be made in that age bracket. Something very direct, sort of deliberately simple, and just deeply impassioned in how just scrappy and single-minded it is. And I think those are all adjectives that apply really well to this album. So to describe what Heresie sounds like is a little bit challenging, because you want to jump to obvious stuff that is sort of thematically or aesthetically similar, and a reference point here would be Peste Noire, but this doesn't actually sound like Peste Noire. In fact, it doesn't really sound like any of the other big names in French black metal. What it really sounds like is a lot of scrappy CDR stuff that I used to hear around the late 2000s and early 2010s. This is deliberately primitive and blocky drum machine-led music, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This is the apex of the 18-year-old bedroom black metal album. It has all the things that made some of that shit really awesome, and it does away with all the sort of like fucked up incompetence that characterized a lot of it too. And what you get is something that is sort of earthy and rural, but scowling and ornery at the same time. It's impassioned and sad, but sort of resolutely realistic at once. I can't think of another record that really shares the atmosphere that this one has, and for that alone, I think that it's super cool. But Black Metal Guy, you called me late last night when I was at a party to express your feelings about the record, so how about you take it away?
I love it. It's awesome.
I knew when I selected that you were just going to immediately love this.
Yeah. I think after getting through the second half of the record, I think the second, okay, by the time you get to the second, it's a 50-minute record. By the time you get to the second half, you're like, okay, these guys are starting out. There are some mistakes in how sometimes the songs sprawl in the bad way, I think, and lose some of the energy. However, it's partly okay because the songs on the back end of the record are sadder. So yeah, it's not like when I was like, let's say this, when I was a third of the way through the record, I was like, oh, this is album of the year for sure. like just based on the first 3 major songs, I was like, this is just sick. This is I think it's a little more hit or miss on the second half, but there's plenty of good stuff there. And the record as a whole has so much personality and energy and is just so true that it's really commendable.
Yeah, it's definitely it's so fucking spirited, and it like justifies its own album cover. This just like this very pretty painting of French pastoralism, and it's like there's so many albums that would have this cover and would fucking suck. But this...
Yeah. I think I've seen the cover and I ignored it because I assumed it was Atmo Black.
Yeah. You think it's Atmo Black, but this is like simultaneously way more like ragged and mean than the cover would imply, but it's also perfectly contiguous with it. You know what I mean? It's an album of fascinating dualism in that it's like really like pissed off and ugly sometimes, but it's perpetually appropriate for its aesthetic.
Yeah, if I wanted to make a broad comparison for this, it would be Pagan Hellfire.
Yeah, I can see that.
Which some people have also compared Cavern to. But like basically for that comparison, well, you know what? Let's just get into a sample first, because I think that'll be helpful. But basically, the overall point related to the cover and to Pagan Hellfire is this record has a wonderful production. It's raw, it's rasping, it's trebly but not spiky or grating. And like a lot of the early black metal records, it's mixed kind of quiet, but in a way that begs to be turned up. I was listening to this record last night, like, almost at the pain threshold. And when you do that, like, the relatively sparse instrumentation and really minimalist riffs, they throw off and open up huge sonic landscapes. And you can recognize in them, the French countryside, but it is a French countryside that's, there's some ironies going on in how they've structured it. I think some deliberate ironies, right? And so the cover gives us like the serenity of the pastoral, right? You and I were complaining about easy pastoralism just before we recorded the show, right? Sentimental retreat to the countryside, blah, blah, blah. The cover could easily be dismissed as sentimental schlock or whatever, but there's obviously also something deeply appealing about that landscape, and and in the music, they sort of take that familiar, sort of domesticated, well-trodden, thoroughly kind of farmed over, settled, humanized land that's had just like thousands of years of continuous settlement and, at least 1,000 years of continuous sort of civilization there. Like, let's, like, you're right, punctuated by more than that, but okay, like there's Rome and then there's the Dark Ages, right? Basically, rural France in some ways is land that has been worked over by people for a very long time. And there are, we're all familiar with these vistas of rolling beautiful hills and, lush forests and fertile valleys and all that. And it's easy to think of it as a sweet thing. This record sort of defamiliarizes the French countryside, and suddenly you're seeing it as rugged and harsh and as sort of wasteland in the way they meant it in the Middle Ages, where nobody lives.
You see, it's interesting because I almost have this like sort of parallel yet opposite take, just in that it sounds like it is a familiar and strangely comforting landscape because you grew up there, but because you grew up there, you know that it's dangerous also.
I like that. I mean, yeah, this certainly is not about being disturbed by the land. It's about a deep feeling of rootedness and identification. Yeah, I see what you mean. You know it so well that you know it is not just tame vacation land.
Yeah,
and you understand it as nature red in tooth and claw.
Yeah, it's kind of like Gyendod's Angrep, which is like an affectionate period piece about, like turn of the century Scandinavia, but it's also about like having to deal with a wolf when you have a pocket knife,
No, I think we're agreed on this, basically. Like, I think we're actually saying the same thing. It's like, you're taking the notion of it as sort of smiley, happy, settled place, a calm and peaceful place, and restore, and not restoring, because it was always there, but revealing the primordial landscape under it, and jacking into that, you mentioned Gyendod. Well, let's drop into the record on a riff that just sounds like it could have come off of one of the earlier Gyendod records. That's commitment.
Yeah.
Right? So we start off on this riff, this sort of just buzzsawing tritone descent, and then this kind of skittering arpeggio that really sounds like it could be on I said Gyendod, but even more than that, it's just like Emperor Before the Emperor EP. It's like something off the Wrath of the Tyrant demo, like Ancient Queen or like Moon over Karasher or whatever.
Yeah, the rougher, more death metal aligned stuff.
Yeah, and like really sort of garagey, and it has this sort of, that stuff had this sort of like loping off-kilter vibe that you could hear, well, certainly in the second riff, that the strange rhythmic feel you could hear in the second riff that came in, and the jaggedness of it. And the thing that, so here, And in the sample, you hear this strange juxtaposition of youthfulness and maturity, which is like the first riff, that first buzzsawing riff is just like, and as you say, yeah, kind of death metal-y, is they just repeat it forever.
Yeah.
And there are moments when they make it sound like it's going to stop, and then it doesn't. They never do like a fake end to it, like Overkill, Motorhead, but like there are moments where it's sort of like fakes at a turnaround or something and just plows ahead. They don't drop it. And it's that is the kind of thing that once I realized that they weren't going to stop playing the riff, I was like, this is genius. like this is just like, that is like the energy that made the genre what it is. And it's there is no fucks given about being quote unquote boring or being unoriginal or anything like that. These guys are like 19 or 20, and for them, just dissonant, evil, mayhemic emperor riffs like that just have all of the gravity that they had for us at that age, and they transmit it here.
Yeah, it's there is such a passion for just playing black metal on this album. A passion that, like, after you've been doing it for a while, just sort of naturally slips away. It doesn't get worse, it just gets different. You have a different emotional connection to it. Here, the emotional connection to this music is so hot and immediate, it's like, it transports me back to being a teenager and listening to this shit. But then, like, there's also the chording at the end of that riff. There's like kind of weird harmony going on, right? Mm-hmm. It's not just like an evil dark. It's not just like, say, generic Darkthrone aggressive riff. No,
right?
It is connected to the French ruralism, even in its most kind of dissonant and Scandinavian moments. Mm-hmm.
And it's connected to like the more subtle Scandinavian black metal rather than to like the sort of parodies of it that have come after. And the teenage energy here, I think the thing I want to emphasize is like the teenage energy here is not like bash it out in the garage. It's like Norwegian teenager energy.
Yeah,
that sort of strange sophistication and seriousness. But yeah, and so then you hear that, because then they get to the end of the riff. They don't even bother doing like loser grown-up shit like writing a transition riff or even really a turnaround. They just stop and then just start playing immediately this really bizarre, beautiful riff that sounds like it could have been written by someone like 3 times their age. Yeah. It's like, or by Rob Darkin in his 20s.
Yeah,
like,
I was gonna say, I was listening to Thousand Swords the other day, and I was in my car, and I was like, well, let's listen to Thousand Swords, see what all the fuss is about. Boy, that's weird music. But it also this album reminds me a lot of, like, Thousand Swords, Carpathian Wolves type shit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and this riff especially, it's a very cool sort of brooding folk riff, and it extends in a bizarre way. I think it's written in, I tried counting it, it seems like it's in 16/8, but the 8th notes are all played as triplets.
Yeah, it's very strange. There's some sort of like accidental polyrhythm going on.
I'm not even sure it's accidental. Like, that would have been difficult to count.
Yeah, it would be.
And the fact that sort of bespoke or kind of isorhythmic thing makes it like that gives it the quality of folk music being played detached from a drum kit.
Yeah.
Right? It has that weird wandering quality of authentic folk melody that was more tuned to song and pure melody. Mm-hmm. So just very strange and very cool. And then the song just ends there. I think it's literally 2 riffs. It doesn't need any more.
It expresses everything it needs to.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's what I have to say about that one. But that one is awesome. It basically is just, this is sort of, and the other big picture thing I wanted to say, I mean, this is really a great foil for Nécropole in that these are both, Nécropole is the event, it shows the same absolute conviction, right? Same sort of fanatic devotion to the art, but in this very mature, restrained, and sort of multifaceted way, right? There's like a stained glass cathedral look to that record. This is where they're just all these mutually reinforcing parts and crazy levels of detail, and this is that impulse at its most. And this is the same impulse, but it's rawest and most youthful. It's just absolute commitment to 2 riffs. And if the Nécropole record is sort of the king in his realm, this is the outlaw or the raider, the young wolf in the woods. And these guys are hungry, and instead of thinking too much about, or not too much, instead of concerning themselves with, say, structure or whatever, so much of this is centered on the riffs and the immediate way that a couple riffs interact with each other.
Yeah, it has all that sort of strident immediacy of both, like, traditional Scandinavian stuff, as well as, like this really makes me reflect back on that sort of, that late 2000s CDR era that I'll talk about on the show a lot.
And they could have done a split with Cavern.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in 2012 or whatever, right? Yeah, so here's my second one. I got the first couple songs, you got the later stuff.
Mm-hmm.
This record, where yoga has this kind of sublime repose, although I'm not sure I even really buy my own take on that anymore. This record is, it's pretty driving, and the motion is coming immediately from the riffs, and more than that, I buy it. It does not have, what does you say, the sort of like distant confidence, or whatever, of the like, right, yoga is, yes, it's sort of, it shows an effortlessness. This record is all under great emotional strain. You can feel that it is made by people who are being racked by passion, right? But it's not some sort of like teenage Bildungsroman. You're endlessly striving and never getting anywhere. You're always in the act of growing up. And it's not just like all-directional impotent angst. It is fiercely directed. And the interesting thing is that this record, there's some real drama in the structures. It's not always just riff. And this song shows, in a very simple, very direct way, there is tension and striving, but there's finally actually attaining. And let's start the sample just as the main riff reaches a false peak and tumbles down.
Yeah, those are... But again, you know, just like the boldness of that, like, insane elongated tapping lead at the end.
So the tapping stuff has got to be sort of Pest Noir. The sort of like the whole you can do anything and the whole like flourishing tapping thing, I think that's Pest Noir stuff.
Well, you can also get that directly from Gorgoroth on Antichrist.
There's tap soloing?
Dude, yeah. I mean, on the self-titled song, one of the primary riffs is like an all-tapped riff. That like really ostentatious one on Gorgoroth by Gorgoroth, yeah, there's a big tapping riff on that one.
Well, anyway, it seemed like the sort of unhinged tap stuff that happens on like the first Pest Noir record.
Yeah.
But like there's a tremendous freedom in that. We were talking about how Amertum in Nécropole has no preconceived notions about what you can and can't put in your song. This is another really good example. It's like, hey, you know, what if we returned to the main riff and now we cut in front of the sound space with these really rough, needling, swarming arpeggios?
Yeah, it's this, you know, this kind of has, like, although it sounds very different, that same sort of, like, slightly improvised quality that, like, Devilgroth has.
I actually totally thought that when I was listening to this. It's like, these are guys who have, like, learned all of the structural things from Blazebirth Hall, but the music doesn't sound like it at all.
Yeah,
like,
I can
that
hear that.
Climax could have been on the sort of fierce directedness in that climax could have been on the Sternatus record that came out last year.
Yeah, I could see that.
Whatever your opinions on Blazebirth Hall related drama. And it has the weirdness of the very earliest Blazebirth Hall stuff, like fucking, you know, just the most bizarre early Branacald or like Rundagore recordings.
Mm-hmm.
This record is, although it has a lot of the melodic sensibility and harmonies and the riffing styles we associate with French black metal, and some of the soaring moods and the also, as you say, the sort of misery. French black metal often gets flattened into sort of pleasant and pleasant music, and this is extreme metal, first and foremost. And anyway, the thing I really wanted to say about that build-up, though, is like that method of huge build that's driven by lead work is like Pagan Hellfire.
Mm-hmm.
The riff Solidarity has a couple huge songs, including the title track, that just function around these soaring, spiraling leads that just keep going and keep going and keep going, and then boom. Except the interesting thing about this song is that once it hits the climax, that's just it. And the point is that the maximum of energy is in the striving for it, right? And they do a really subtle setup, too. When they go into that escalating part, there's also a very Pagan Hellfire sort of stompy part with these weirdly disharmonized leads. Those kind of like, this kind of like ugly, that kind of abrasive lead work is also pretty Pagan Hellfire, and the stompiness of it. And he's got the bass chasing the guitars in a really cool way.
Yeah,
which you'll talk about.
Yeah, I'll talk about it because the bass work on this album is really good and really interesting.
But yeah, so basically it's when they come out of that skronky part, they suddenly introduce a riff that is very similar to the main riff, but is much more sort of instead of having this tense, longing, striving, it's like a soaring, overcoming, triumphant, like mighty riff, right? And then they switch that riff into the original striving riff,
and drop the spiraling arpeggios over it. And the song hits its peak, mission accomplished, wow, 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 spiral out, done.
This is definitely a record where this is one of those black metal records where all the songs extend infinitely in either direction on either side of the track time. Yeah,
for sure.
Excuse me. So my samples are going to emphasize probably the more directly sad sounding stuff. There's a big streak of DSBM on this, and I don't think they would be shy about telling you that. So I want to go to Faux Espoirs, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
False Hopes.
Yeah.
It's in the song titles, too.
Yeah. So this is probably my favorite track on the record. And this is where the sort of understated sophistication of this band really starts to speak for itself. In contrast to the first couple tracks that are based off these like really kind of snapping, contrasting compositional techniques, this is a lot smoother and more contiguous, but they still manage to pack a lot of really cool stuff into that texture. Boom, that whole fucking section, this whole track is just a marvel. The second riff on this song is just like an all-timer riff. With that enormous just dive down the fretboard and then ending in this like almost mutilation-inspired sort of suspended chord at the end. It's so fucking beautiful. And that's the kind of riff you can only write between the ages of 16 and 23. You know, and you can only have played guitar for a certain amount of time. Because you will overcomplicate it and get in the way of it after a few years. Yeah. Oh, holy fuck, man. That's so good.
The sense of time in it is so
Yeah, the slide is really built into that riff.
Yeah, you're right. It really sweeps upwards like a glissando.
Yeah, it's just beautiful. And that whole arrangement is beautiful. And there's like subtle shit that goes on. Like recontextualizing the synth intro against a different riff. Like halfway through the song at the end of that sample is like a simple kind of motivic technique, but I can tell you right now, back when we were 19-year-olds didn't do that. You know, we didn't fucking know how to do that shit. So basically the average, one thing to keep in mind is just the average level of sophistication of like the younger musicians we see is just like way ahead of a lot of what we had back then. It's not necessarily better or worse, but all these kids are just way more informed than they used to be. But I really like bringing this song to the table in contrast to your two, which really emphasize sort of the hardest edged and most dissonant and most high contrast parts of the record versus this other much more chilled out and very, very fucking sad mode that sort of that is the other half of the equation here.
Yeah, and yet, as you talked about, there's also a really stern, and even though the song is called False Hope, there is a stern and resolute hope even in that crushingly sad riff we were talking about.
Yeah.
Should I get into the stuff we were talking about during the sample?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, well, so there's something here where, like, this record, the song titles, I was saying at the beginning, there's something about the sort of deliberate ironies of the record, right? You have this happy cover, and then the music is, well, it's a lot of things, but it's not blissed out. And the song titles have this sort of, they sort of bounce different moods off each other, and sometimes contrast even with the content of the song. I don't know, so like, first one, Heresie, that's easy enough, right? That's just like, okay, confrontation, conflict, breaching with convention, and it's also just a nod to the Norwegians, right? And you can hear that musically. Second one is Abod, how do I do this? Aboud de Souffle, which means breathless. It's the name of a Godard film, but I doubt that's what they're referencing, at least on... They might be referencing it ironically, but I doubt that's what the song is about. But, sort of breathlessness, excitement, maybe, but also stifling of breath. Maybe also anxiety and tension. Next one, False Hopes, right? And False Hopes has some of the most beautiful, sprawling melodies on the record, right? Interlude, then track 6 which is very aggressive. Maybe not one of the most successful riffs, but very aggressive dark track is called To Truly Live. Then there's one called 7, the more elegant one called The Sad Lie. And then finally we get to United Esprit Uni, right? I don't know, United Spirits. The record seems to really speak to part of the unique mood we've been trying to wrap our heads around, is that this is Zoomer black metal. And it's about and their relationship to the land and to France is different from that of Gen X or black metal musicians. So if you can hear in the kind of wild anger and extremely oppositional nature, and also just very deliberate trolling of the Norwegian bands, and a lot of the Swedes, and then, the 90s French, and certainly the Poles, or whatever. There's this sense that there's cool dudes in the metal scene, or also weirdo nerds in the metal scene, getting the sense that their country is being pulled out from under their feet, right?
and they are lashing out with rage, and also with this kind of like cruel jests, right? Provocation, opposition, confrontation. And there's a... this record is a little bit different. This record, it feels like they grow up in a France that's already gone. They feel the country to have already gone out from under their feet. And yet, at the same time, they feel there's an incredible solidity and groundedness to it. It's almost like, we know things have changed in a kind of very conclusive way, or things have changed in this pervasive way. We are not growing up in idyllic rural France. And yet, for that, we look for what is solid and what is enduring here, which is the land. And as you say, right, once they know the land reveals its terrible majesty, and they are regrounded in the place. It's almost like there's less anger here, and there's more of a sense of, I don't know, in another way, this is like the Cavern, but in a very different way. This is quite assured music. They feel completely dispossessed and disinherited, and yet completely at home.